he does. And I did actually cheat a bit and sort of put some headers as to what we might want to discuss with you, particularly about the tree and ecosystem strategy in Salisbury and how do you maximise our carbon sequestration. Please give us some advice on that, and how you do environmental assessments, and how you got on with the GBI strategy and whether it's actually working in Wiltshire.
Yep.
So those are the sort of things we'll talk to you about, but I'm sure you've got a lot more to tell us as well. So if I hand over to you, I don't know if you want to show any slides.
Yeah, so I've got some slides I've pulled together covering a few different things, a bit of background about me and what I do, then about the Salisbury tree and ecosystem strategy, and a bit about the work I do with Wiltshire Council and English Nature on the GBI pilot strategy, and then we can sort of pick up other things if that's okay. But obviously, pick up questions and things as we go through. So I will try my best to make the technology work. So just bear with me 1 second.
Did you get no access, Julian? Okay.
Okay, so can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So I thought just as an intro, just to talk to you a little bit about myself. So I've been very passionate about the environment and both physical environment, rivers, coastal, mountains, geomorphology, that sort of thing, as well as sort of biology and ecology from school, with a real influence from when I was young, just in terms of things I read, things I did with my family. I went to uni to study geography and geology. So at that point, it was very much was around sort of hydrology, mountains, glaciers, that sort of thing. But I went on to do a master's in water. It was called aquatic resource management, quite a lot of fisheries and aquatic ecology, as well as bits around water treatment. And I got my first job then with a consultancy at the University of Manchester, where I was an undergrad, doing lots of sort of more water sort of ecology, which I still am heavily involved in, but also sort of getting a bit more involved in other things. I moved to a larger company called Entech, which has been sold several times now, and is now part of WSP, I think. I was there 7 years, moved down from Manchester to Bristol to set an office up, running an ecology team and an EIA team, involved in quite a lot of different sorts of projects, different sectors, but got to a point with my wife, Liz, who was working for a consultancy in Bath with Nicholas Pearson's. We should set up on our own just to sort of try and get a bit of a better balance. We've got 3 children, so that's what we did, and that was 15 years ago. So we set John's Associates up down at home to start with, actually, then down in Limpley Mill in Limpley Stoke, moved to the old brewery in Bradford and Avon, and then after a year of the office being empty because of COVID, we found another new home which we've moved to, which is in the centre of Bradford, called Green Tree House. So John's Associates is 20 of us. We cover a range of things. We don't get involved in planning anymore. Well, we have done, but our planners left and joined a really positive renewables company, but we still work with her. But we're focused on sort of ecology, landscape architecture, things around sort of nature-based solutions, so natural flood management, habitats and carbon. We get involved in different aspects with water and soil and sediment, and try to sort of pull all those things together where we can to sort of provide a sort of a good integrated solution from the environment to the things people need and what we want to do in terms of looking after the environment. So our work covers a range of things, so conservation, habitat creation. So sometimes that is mitigation, enhancement in relation to change in land use or development, but equally it's very much pure conservation as well. So we do quite a bit of work with the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust. We've just finished a design and construction project in a water park for a series of new sort of ponds, scrapes, wetlands, and then sort of raised habitat areas. We've taken that material, put it in an adjacent lake. This is somewhere called a Lower Moor Farm Nature Reserve, and we've used the material in the lakes, mainly gravel, to sort of create submerged and exposed gravel shoals and features to try and boost plant life and invertebrates, things like dragonflies and damselflies. We've been involved in other similar sort of water-related things. A big place called Fleet Pond SSI down in Hampshire, at Fleet. So that was a big, massive project actually, which sort of starts off with a little bit of scoping money, which then secured money from Natural England for pond restoration, although it's 25 hectares of water, so you can't really call it a pond. And that generated more money from Natural England and the Environment Agency. So we ended up securing almost £1 million of capital work money for the council then to spend on dredging the lake and reusing that to form islands, re-exposing the old seed bank that had been subsequently buried by urban and rural runoff and sediment deposition. The islands also serve to break up the wind generated waves, so we can now start to see sort of restoration of plants, zooplankton and the water sort of transparency improving a lot. So quite a lot of sort of good things that way, but terrestrial as well as aquatic. We're involved, as I mentioned, in renewable projects, largely solar, but it's really interesting. We work with a company called Spring, who are based in Chippenham, who came out of Good Energy, so it's a lot of the Good Energy sort of site development team, and it's a really strong sort of synthesis between sort of restoring particularly sort of either derelict brownfield sites, old landfills, or in the case of these two projects here, agricultural sites which are being largely sort of arable, so maize. So we start off with a site where we've got a lot of sediment runoff, nutrient runoff, not a great use of the land with maize necessarily in terms of what you could do with it. We then look at sort of resting that for the period we've got the solar farm. We've got a really good sort of botanist, so we're looking at the sort of transition back to species rich grassland, but also restoring the sort of maintaining the natural hydrology, so allowing the land to sort of soak up by blocking land drains and getting wet. The infrastructure can cope with sort of getting its feet wet. So we can then start to see sort of soil processes, soil storage of carbon, sort of restored, and then getting the landscape scale features like old hedgerows and tree belts and woodlands and things like that re-established to break the site up. So from a visual impact assessment and looking at the landscape character, it's more sympathetic. Clearly there's a lot of challenge with how you do that, but both these schemes have got planning permission. Pleased to say the Manor Farm scheme went to committee, endorsed it today and got unanimous approval. So that scheme is brilliant because what it does, it takes agricultural runoff, a lot of nutrients from both the land the solar panels are on and upslope, and it basically runs it through a really large wetland and diverts it away from a SSI that's part of the Dorset Heaths Special Area Conservation, allowing Natural England and the Dorset Wildlife Trust to infill a ditch and allow natural water levels to be restored, and they can now move forward with restoring the SSI. But with all of those, so that's a really good example of, I suppose, how we try and approach our work and link these things together. But obviously on top of that, then you can install the solar panels and generate the cleaner energy from it as well. But it's really exciting when you can do that. So monitoring is obviously a big part of seeing how these things work. We get involved in sports and sort of wellness side, trying to influence sustainability. So we do a lot of work with Hampshire Cricket. It's a long-term project, like a lot of ours seem to be, which is great because that means you can get good relationships with your client and sort of influence for the better, really. But we've been looking at site down in near Southampton for quite a long time in terms of generating new sort of habitats and providing, now we've got the DEFRA biodiversity metric, actually sort of measuring the biodiversity improvements that can be specified and delivered on these sorts of sites, where on the face of it looks fairly intensive with the stadium and cricket and golf course and hotel and that sort of thing. But alongside what's required through planning, there's a real desire and an aim to sort of give more back and create a biodiversity rich environment, which is much more attractive for people to use. So it's a sort of a two-way thing. So they're an interesting and positive client to work with. We do get involved in environmental impact assessment and other types of impact. So we look at sort of environmental risk assessment. So looking at what happens if there's explosions or large spillages of chemicals and what sort of pathways are present and how how you can sort of reduce that and manage that risks down and the sort of response side. So it's that's quite hard edge, sort of almost like environmental engineering, risk assessment stuff. But other EIA work, really sort of looking at projects that sort of have the potential to sort of result in more significant effects set out by various regulations. So it's really looking at the overall scope of what needs to be assessed and the specialist topics that you need to look at, covering things like noise, air quality, flooding, ecology, soils, climate change, and a whole raft of other things. So we don't have many of these, but we have 2 or 3 running where we sort of coordinate this, and then we're asked to sort of come in and feed in sort of specialist input onto various projects. So the 2 solar projects I mentioned, both were EIA, for example, so we coordinated those and wrote the environmental statement and drew in other services like archaeology as and when we needed to. We get involved in advice and policy. So some examples here, fairly local. So we were lucky to be appointed by Wiltshire Council, Natural England, to put together the Community Environmental Toolkit. So I think, well, it was 2020 and got issued in 2021. So that was great, because that really, again, sort of helped draw lots of different strands of the work we do and things we're interested in together, plus what this is sort of part of the local nature recovery partnership. So it's helping community groups that don't necessarily have the background or people with the knowledge, helping them sort of identify how to sort of put a structure together on projects that they're involved in or might want to do, and then how to feed the information back in a way that would support the future sort of local nature recovery strategies. A number of years ago, we got involved with Wiltshire Council to pull together a Trowbridge bat mitigation strategy supplementary planning document. So that really sort of looked at the response to the potential growth in housing around Trowbridge. We've got quite large areas that are sort of associated with bats that are linked to a special area of conservation, associated SSSIs. So it was a development of a scheme really that sort of identifies sort of key zones that bats use, and buffer zones to them, and a mechanism whereby if development sort of encroaches up to that, then there's a funding mechanism that will come back. And so that's led to things like funding a bats officer within Wiltshire Council that sort of helps look at these sorts of things, as well as sort of habitat management, those sorts of angles as well. So it sort of sets it down in policy as well, part of the sort of local plan. And recently, we've just we produced the Caution neighbourhood plan a number of years ago. We also then produced a sort of what we call Batscape strategy for Caution, which sort of looks at the sort of landscape context and draws in the sort of data from Wiltshire Bat Group and the local record centre. Looks at sort of features that need to be sort of protected and buffered, and so trying to set that out within the neighbourhood plan. We've just been appointed to do a biodiversity action plan for Caution. So looking at its land, about 25 odd sites. So reviewing the sort of current management, the habitat value, opportunities, threats, and then using that to sort of feed into revised contractor contracts that are being tendered, I think, at the end of this year. So moving forward, future management has much better links to the sort of objectives that Caution want and the community sort of want in terms of biodiversity access, ecosystem services, carbon, those sorts of things, and hopefully sort of enabling some budget saving by doing things like mowing less frequently, leaving much larger habitat patches, that sort of thing. Yeah, this when we were involved again. This was when we had a planning capability. We managed the planning application for an expansion of Roudford School, a new sort of school for children who have special sort of education requirements, which has been renamed Silverwood School. So it's a really interesting project. Again, sort of using the local landscape where the school is, the historic environment, historic parkland as part of the outdoor educational resource. But clearly sensitivities there. We've got Bechstein bats and horseshoe bats and badgers and various other things. So, how you could sort of be a custodian of the ecology whilst trying to enhance the learning opportunities. So just drawing this bit to a close, really, I suppose, you know, our main sort of thing is to influence others for a better future. You know, no time to waste, as we all know, and you know, we can use regulation and policy to support that, but also, you know, our personalities, and fortunately we seem to work with clients who want to make a positive difference, so we're quite lucky, really. So that's the end of a bit of an intro about me. I don't know if anyone's got any questions about the work we do, or the sorts of projects I get involved in at this stage, and then I can move on to talk a bit about the Salisbury tree strategy.
Questions, anybody?
Okay.
Yes, I do. Sorry. I couldn't find my unmute button quickly enough. I just had a question about the, you mentioned the Caution biodiversity plan. I just wondered who that's being funded by. Is it being funded by the Town Council?
Yes, it is. Yeah, Caution Town Council. So yeah, we're working with their team. So they've got all the location information, and then we've been going well, earlier in the year. We were doing sort of habitat surveys, looking for sort of you know, features that might be used by protected or important fauna, as well as the flora. And then we're reviewing the existing management applications on the site, look at what opportunities there are for sort of diversifying habitats, and then drawing that together, both in terms of how we can sort of maximise the benefit that those sites can provide to the community, and, you know, to the wider sort of ecosystem networks. And part of that is to look at how we can improve the sort of management specification that the contractors who manage those sites will implement. So that draws on the strengths of our ecologists and landscape architects, and then we'd sort of do the mapping work around that, put the specifications together. So yeah, Caution's been very, very proactive on that.
Oh, that's great, thanks. And presumably it links into the GBI infrastructure.
Yes, it will be. Yes, we've drawn on what's available from Wiltshire's sort of plan and information that Caution have, and it links to the neighbourhood plan as well. And we're revising the sort of batscape strategy in Caution as well. It's sort of the whole thing sort of linked together.
Right, great, thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Gordon.
Well, thanks for that, Matt. That was very interesting. Could I ask a general question? As you're involved with several councils, and it looks like the weather report, so we're going to have rather stormy weather very shortly, as well and ongoing in the future. So have any of the councils put to you about the drainage from fields, i.e. the ditches? Is there ditch management, and how is that linking in with all the rest of the thing?
Yeah, not directly, apart from looking at things in relation to looking at sort of land, I suppose, and looking at the function of land for absorbing and holding water and creating wetlands, and using techniques where, you know, whether you're sort of putting bundles of wood, sort of creating leaky dams and slowing the flow that way, or maybe through longer vegetation, and the carbon function of creating wetlands. That's the sort of context that we've been sort of working, I suppose, in, and the things I've sort of described. Just thinking in terms of that, there are where we've been involved with council-led developments, so like the Fleet Pond project, we did another wetland project for Hart District Council. Those have to go through the normal planning system, so they're thinking about it that way. But I think it's the idea and the thinking about sort of flood management is at that sort of trying to get at that catchment scale, where you're looking at the land management and you're looking at field drainage and ditches. But I think it links the water company work as well, because it's just so difficult, because I think everything is compartmentalized. So with South East Water, where I do quite a bit of work, looking at sort of their environment plan for 25 years, and it's all around catchment resilience, and there's, you know, the interrelationship between sort of land management, intensive rainfall, runoff, then you've got sort of land drainage straight into these ditches, which are then cleaned out. They run straight into the river. The river's in flood as it is at the moment. You can't abstract the water because it's too laden with sediment, and you've got the issues with sewage coming in as well, or pesticides coming in, washed in off the fields and things, and you know, you've got so many different stakeholders involved, or people who are responsible for different things like cleaning out road drains, making sure, you know, they function. But then where does that go? You know, do they wash straight into the river? Do they go into flood someone's house? And it's a really, I think things have become really complicated over time as things have got privatized and policies come out. I think there's a move to draw things back together, and things like environmental land management scheme, you know, that and initiatives that organisations are putting in place. Wildlife Trust are doing a lot on this, as is Wessex Water as well, where they're paying for, you know, things like farmers to store more water in the Somerset levels and trying to manage phosphates and nitrates through that. There needs to be a lot more sort of joined up big landscape level thinking and schemes, and I don't know where the proposed revisions to the sort of, you know, under the Environment Act and under the Agriculture Act have got to, for things like elms, with the change in governments. So I haven't really sort of found that out yet. I mean, Liz Truss clearly was keen to do away with them. Rishi Sunak, I don't think he's sort of made made a formal point on it, but what I have sort of heard from people who know people in DEFRA is the DEFRA officers are very keen to sort of continue with the trajectory that things were going on beforehand, and the organisations that have the schemes in the moment trying to pay for those sorts of environmental services are very keen to continue with them. There seems to be a good uptake in them as well. So coming back down to sort of councils, I suppose the other thing I've heard is aware of is councils looking to use do audits of their own land to identify, you know, how they can sort of maximise the benefit from them, whether that's in biodiversity side of things or natural flood management side of things. So it's a bit of a long way around.
Yeah. Things a bit complicated because the farmers are actually paid by the councils to keep the ditches clear. Yeah. And there doesn't seem to be any management of how that's getting done. And we've been flooded, and several other villages locally have been flooded. And that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, it's significant. I mean, the council is now the lead local flood authority for surface water and what's called ordinary watercourses, and the Environment Agency is responsible for what's called main rivers. So it is the councils who have that lead local authority responsibility, both in terms of, you know, setting out what should go where and enforcing on that. So they should be, you know, doing everything they can do to sort of maintain drainage in the right way and not, you know, accelerate water into smaller and smaller systems to cause them to back up and flood out. You need to store the water on the land and in the vegetation. Creating more wetlands is, you know, obviously only one part of doing that. It's having wetter soils and you know, restoring that really early stage hydrology.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, that's a really interesting point, Matt, and thanks, Gordon, for bringing it up, because we're looking to understand how we can help, and you're saying that the councils are now responsible for managing all water courses other than main rivers. What about the water companies?
No. That they pay out to the farmers to keep the ditches clean.
Yeah.
Hedging.
Hang on.
But
you're gone.
But it's managing them, and it's like Matt was just saying, it's the linkage really. People aren't talking to each other because it's maybe compartmentalised from councils to the water boards and maybe DEFRA as well. Now that the farmers have got to have rather big pools to keep their all their stuff, the nitrates and all this stuff out off the fields, because they were just spreading it or putting it into the ditch, which is then killing some of the trees and the wildlife. So it's a pain in the butt, to say the least.
Yeah. So Matt, how do you see it?
Yeah. Well, as I say, I think there's no sort of general. I mean, at a high level, there would seem to be sort of some policy and some legislation covering this, but it's really when you drill down into the detail, and it's going to be different between different local authorities and Environment Agency teams, different landowners and their interest and willingness to look at alternatives. You know, that phrase slowing the flow, and that is what it's all about. It's only since we've introduced, you know, drainage that, you know, dries land for productivity or to remove water from some certain areas, you then have the water going somewhere else, and it's got to be slowed down and stored. And so it's really sort of integrating that back across the landscape with more natural areas, you know, to sort of intercept rainfall, and looking at blocking certain ditches and drains, allowing the water to back up and flood out and predict where that is. So the Environment Agency does have some good resources on natural flood management and where that can occur. You can also go on the Environment Agency's website and look at their mapping for surface water as well. That's really interesting to look at. So you can start to sort of look and play with, you know, where can you fill this water? Where is it feasible to do that? And of course, all the time, you know, things change, and you know, whether it's new sort of residential development or whether it's you know, looking at sort of change in other land use. So the solar projects, for example, even though you would think that you know, some rain's going to fall between the panels, some rain's going to fall on the panels and run down them, but then it'll hit the ground. And you'd think it's not going to change from the current conditions, but potentially that would, the water can run off quicker and then sort of saturate the ground quicker. So even in a project like that, where it's sort of sat above this restoring sort of you know, ecology rich landscape, we still have to model that flood runoff. We've got to factor in a 40% uplift on a really big storm event, and then we've got to create somewhere for that water to be stored, so that when that happens, when that storm hits, it doesn't run off or discharge from the land any greater than it currently does. It's called the Greenfield runoff rate. So even in that situation, where, although that's one which has gone through planning, so that scrutiny is there, and we're being, you know, challenged to make sure that those calculations are done and that the right amount of wetland attenuation is provided. But even in a sort of like a sort of soft type development where you have all this habitat and we're purposely creating and restoring the wetlands, you still have to provide the flood attenuation. But that's not the same if you change from a land use that doesn't necessarily need planning and that level of scrutiny into something else where you might have much quicker runoff happening. So yeah, that's just an example of a difference, really.
I think I was trying to get to the point where, because from what you've described and from what Gordon was saying and others, in fact, how does it? You've got the Environment Agency, you've got local authorities, you've got the water companies, you've got the landowners, and I'm just trying to think who else you might have. But you've got and private companies like the solar farms who have got to deal with this stuff, and maybe housing estates and everything else. Who is the organisation? What organisation is sitting these days looking down on it? Is it the council? Is it the Environment Agency? Because I think it's just, how do we as a group challenge and support in however we can mitigation, because climate is changing, and there's no good saying we're going to fix it all by having a 1.5 degree increase in stopping it at 1.5. We've already got major changes. When we get to 1.5, there'll be major changes, and it's knowing who to look at to say, and how are we going to coordinate all of the problems that go around this, from drainage to storage to whatever. And I'm not clear from what you're saying, and maybe no one else is. It's about who is responsible where and how the hierarchy sits and how all that gets managed, because it just feels I feel really uncomfortable with it. And I guess a lot of other people do too. And Gordon wants to say something. Keep it quick, Gordon.
All I could say, Bill, and to Matt, and to all the members who are listening, we've got to have a plan, all of us together, to write to your MPs, because they're the first people. But the other people who the MP relates to is DEFRA. So when you write to your MP, you've got to point out that these aren't linked and they're not getting managed properly. And then you've got select committees, and you can write to the select committee as well on the environment. And this is costing a lot of money to the government. And it's not thought through because all of these people don't want to be held accountable. And that's the problem. Now we've got the weather people telling us in February, we're looking at storm weather where we're going to have lots of flooding all over the country. Now, this is going to become a very serious matter because in the next 6 years, as I say, we're going to have a 27 millimetre or centimetre rise in sea levels. And we're going to get all these storms, they reckon, every 4 years now. And the government is planning for a 4-degree rise in temperature. So
if only there were, Gordon. Okay, Gordon, okay, we understand. Thank you. Two other people now, Derek and then Claire.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people approach me over flooding issues, and I'm the county councillor in Wiltshire, and the issue can be a little more complex than you're suggesting. But I would certainly, at a first port of call, I'd go and talk to your parish councillor, get hold of your county councillor, and they can then contact the appropriate people, whether it be highways, if it's drainage that impacts on roads. But I had a particular issue where a complainant was saying that he had a problem with water that was flooding actually an area of land that actually they didn't own. Okay, and expecting me to go and beat Wiltshire Council up about upstream drainage issues. The reality is, if there's natural drainage, then there's natural drainage. The time when the council can get involved is where it actually impacts on a house. So if you have water that's flowing out and into your house, then there certainly is a place. But first port of call, talk to your parish councillor, talk to your county councillor.
I think, just before we go on to Claire, my point really was strategically, forget about, there are incidents. Yes, flooding happens and something has to deal with it. But the point is strategically, we as humanity almost have got to think about how we're going to manage this in the future and put those plans in place, whatever that means in terms of, it's likely to flood here, so how are we going to deal with it? It's likely to do this over here, so how are we going to deal with it? And somebody somewhere has to actually take that strategy and work it through. And then, so to minimize the amount of flooding, reacting to an incident is one thing, but actually what I'm trying to say is, how do we actually get the wider picture together and look 5 years, 10 years into the future and work out what we are going to have to do to manage that? I mean, for example, the things Matt's doing in creating flood catchment so that it actually can soak away. Who's doing all of that? Where is it being done? And how do we influence it? So there are specifics which we need to deal with, they're quite rightly, but then there's a general long-term strategic thing that says, is anyone really thinking about it? And I think that's really Gordon's point.
Well, certainly I know at the county level, you have a delegated councillor who's responsible.
Excuse me, I've got something to do with just a second.
You've got a delegated councillor who is involved with the flooding issues, but obviously in terms of overall strategies, then I think people have already suggested DEFRA and Environment Agency. I wouldn't pretend that I know sufficiently who is responsible for that.
And there are what's called strategic flood risk assessments. So they start off at like a scoping level and then they move up to a more detailed level, and that identifies hotspots of flooding and then what needs to be done about it. And those are typically at the sort of county level. So there will be a strategic flood risk assessment for Wiltshire, Hampshire, elsewhere, and those will be produced in consultation with the Environment Agency as well. So I think that they are there, and I think that the approach really is looking at these things strategically and being supportive to the lead local flood authority, the Environment Agency, and landowners, and encouraging, so because there are a lot of good people trying to do this at all different sort of levels. So it's around sort of highlighting that and being supportive and trying to persuade against people making decisions in the first instance that are going to exacerbate it, and to be supportive of the policy that enforcing the policy to prevent development that leads to the wrong type of runoff.
Okay, well, thanks. Claire.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's an interesting comparison with what's happening in the armed forces, which I was just reading about, and really maybe this is something we need to be lobbying for, because in the armed forces there is now a department that's trying to make everything join up. So the importance of making everything join up, and one person not taking a decision that means that, I don't know, weapon system or equipment doesn't fit together with something else, is recognised. So that sort of overall thinking is being implemented in other areas. So maybe that's something we ought to be campaigning for on it. That's the sort of absolute top level or nationally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no good at Wiltshire doing something if, Bath and something, it's got to be at a meta level. But the importance of those sorts of decisions, for example, within the armed forces now, this person I was reading about, who I can't remember the name, is blocking purchases of things which are cheaper but don't communicate with other things. So it's short-term gain for long-term pain, and insisting that everything joins up together. So that sort of thinking in terms of planning and departmental management, all those things is known about, isn't it? It's not a totally new idea that it's completely novel that you should do this on this level. Anyway, that's me.
Well, you're quite right. It doesn't stop at the county borders at all. So that cross-border, cross-county, cross everything. You step back and up, and you've really got. We'll deal with it through the UN, because it's countrywide and continent-wide. Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions from that earlier thing, I think we've got to move on, because we've spent all the evening talking about that. Matt, there's already been a question on something else in this chat, which you might want to pick up later, to do with sequestration and how you measure it.
Okay.
But perhaps you pick that up in a bit. But please carry on. I'm sorry, but we've taken up some time on that first bit.
No problem at all. So I'll go on to talk a bit about the Salisbury tree strategy now. So, sorry, I'm going to be there. So this is a project that has been running for quite a few months now, and it's looking to do a number of different things. So Salisbury City Council obviously are own and responsible for a number of areas of land within the city, and they've recently been allocated more from Wiltshire Council as part of delegating land from a sort of county level down to sort of parish level. So there's a need to identify what trees they've got and where. They do have a tree policy, and they do have tree officers, and they have consultants looking at trees in terms of tree safety and health, and those get monitored every year, but there's an awful lot more trees. So also trying to get out with some statistics to sort of look at, to see how Salisbury's doing in terms of its tree coverage, both in terms of numbers, type, species of trees, and canopy coverage as well, and areas, different wards within the city which are maybe richer or more impoverished with trees. Looking at where maybe you could plant either new individual specimens, or new copses, or connecting woodlands, those sorts of things, and where not to. And then also getting involved with local residents and other groups to try and inform that. So initially, we had those things to start with, but we've then thought, actually, there's an awful lot of other things you can do, because once you start talking about trees and where trees are, and should you plant more trees, you're looking at other habitats. And if you're looking at that and you're thinking about trees, you think about why and the benefits. So I've listed some of them here: biodiversity, carbon, things we've talked about, canopy, intercepting rainfall, so natural flood management, air quality and pollination, feeling good, contributing to the landscape, historic trees, shading, cooling, all of those sorts of things, and looking long term. So we started off doing some mapping. So there's you can buy what's called the National Digital Tree Atlas from a company called Blue Sky Technology. So they fly the country every couple of years, and they use LiDAR and stereoscopic cameras to capture individual tree locations, so they're pretty accurate. Anything above 3 meters is captured, and you can buy that as a sort of mapping layer along with aerial imagery and infrared maps, so you can see the difference between sort of vegetated surfaces and others. You can also access other information on biodiversity, so protected sites, areas which have been mapped as sort of important habitats, heritage areas like conservation areas, tree protection, TPOs, that sort of thing, etc., etc. And we thought we could actually then map the habitats that we're seeing when we're out there to identify their sort of relative value and condition, so we can look to see what happens if we were to plant trees. Is that better in terms of the habitat? Should we be restoring, say, open areas of grassland to something else, more sort of species-rich grassland? So these are all sort of very sort of conceptual ideas at the moment, leading to production of some field survey maps and onto the engagement, which we're sort of involved in a minute, before we sort of come up with sort of final reports and outputs next year. So we started off by sort of getting the parish boundary. So this is just going to show you now, just sort of layering up some of the information that's available, and which we've then added to. This is the land in the parish that Salisbury City Council own or manage. The orange is the recently acquired land from Wiltshire Council. The red is the land they had originally. And then this basically shows individual tree points within that land. So that's the green dots. And you can, it's difficult to see on this, but there are lots of individual trees, as well as the sort of larger sort of woodlands, which they have as well. And then when you sort of add in all of the trees within the parish, it becomes even busier and denser. Obviously, if you zoom in, they do spread out a little bit more. We've been able to look at tree canopy by ward, so we can have a look at sort of the sort of relative distribution of trees in areas. Some areas have quite large areas of agricultural land, so that's accounting for that. But I mean, in general, there are about 12,000 odd trees on land that Salisbury City Council manage, and then there's around about 50,000 trees in Salisbury, which is actually quite a good tally of trees. So that's sort of initial sort of figures, and that's taken from this Blue Skies data. So what we've been doing over the last couple of months, and still got more work to do, which is a bit of worry now that leaves are coming off, so it's harder to sort of make sure you know what tree is, but is visiting the trees. When we started, we had no idea of how many trees there were, or that this additional land was coming. So we've got quite a lot on our list to view. But we go and we visit the trees. We've taken this mapping data, put it onto an app, so we can see where we are. We can see where the tree is. We can press on that location to get a tree ID number, and we can then sort of list its species, if it's large, its general condition, the sort of provisioning services it provides in the local area. Is there space for more planting? What is the habitat? Is it sensitive? You know, what's the land being used for? Those sorts of things, just to give us some sort of background idea. And you can see here where, you know, some of the trees already overlap with conservation areas, so already have some sort of protection. You can drill down into the details. This is what sort of tree survey data's captured already in terms of see individual trees on there, and the tree condition will be drawn out from that. And we can, from the data, we can sort of then pull out sort of information in terms of potential protected species or features they have, the condition of the trees. This is sort of showing associated priority habitat and ancient woodland. And then we've got, this is Natural England's green infrastructure strategy information. So different sort of land uses. We've got designated sites within the city as well. This shows the infrared, so you can sort of see areas that are in red will be areas that are vegetated compared to sort of harder surfaces. Sorry, this is not particularly interesting looking at that. So we've got more work to do in terms of finishing our field surveys. We're probably about 3/4 of the way there now. That information will then be pulled across into the GIS, which is the online mapping system. So we can then sort of go into that and see what trees are where, what species are where the bigger trees are, the older trees, We've obviously got the information on the canopy coverage and, you know, distribution, that sort of thing. Trees which have particular interest in terms of potentially pattern roost features, or used by lots of birds in terms of nesting habitat, or useful in terms of, you know, good source of nectar for pollinators, that sort of thing. And then the areas that, you know, where further trees or change in sort of maybe grass management could be put into place to enhance alternative uses. So that's sort of ongoing. We've been doing some sort of stakeholder engagements. We have an online whiteboard using some software called Miro. And so through Wiltshire Council and I think Salisbury Journal and various other outlets, the link to that was sort of publicised, and I can share that if it's not been shared within this group. You can go onto that and you can look at the map that shows all of the trees. We're inviting people just to sort of highlight which of their sort of trees are important to them, or maybe have a particular memory or a family link, or anything like that, really. You can zoom in and you can tag that tree, just the dot on the map where it is. You can put a little post-it note or a little speech bubble and say why it's important. That way we can sort of give access over quite a long time to quite a lot of people. And then tomorrow in the library, we're sort of having a face-to-face sort of exhibition with these plans up and various other things. So people coming through can come and sort of leave their comments. And that will, the online feedback, you know, will run for another couple of weeks. People can email the council as well if they want to do it that way. So the idea really is just to try and get stories from behind the trees in the city. There are 8 trees that have been picked up by the Woodland Trust as being important to people already. So sorry, I should say the project's in partnership with the Woodland Trust as well. So their regional office has been really helpful. And compare some of the information we're gathering against you know, local and national statistics as well. But ultimately this comes down to delivery. So this is really taking the opportunity to sort of understand and explore what Salisbury's got in terms of its trees and why they're of value. And the report will be produced with a whole load of recommendations, but ultimately this is around sort of helping prioritise sort of management and protection, and then through the consultation with probably another round of consultation at a very local level, just do people want to see more trees, you know, so if there's these open green spaces, maybe improved grassland or amenity grassland, you know, is it more important for them to be used to just informal recreation and play, kids, mums and dads, others, or, you know, should that be turned into a sort of bit of a community orchard, or, you know, those sorts of things. So, and the council's looking to sort of have regular, you know, work to help sort of implement this. So sorry, I'll just skip on through and come out of these slides because they're not particularly interesting or visual in the last couple. But yeah, it's turned into a real, quite a challenging project just because the sheer number of trees, the 12,000 that we've got to look at. But you know, we're getting there slowly. But it's given us a really good perspective, and it's really interesting just to see how the city has really strong tree planting in a lot of areas, and really good sort of, you know, connectivity because of its trees, as well as sort of larger sort of woodland blocks, you know, which are being managed, you know, with access in mind and biodiversity in mind. But it's been interesting to sort of, you know, in starting point, how do we sort of try and get information to help unlock our awareness of the trees, and finding this database, which, you know, you could take this example and apply it anywhere really, and then how you sort of can start to quantify. And just in terms of maybe linking into the question on measuring carbon sequestration and storage, yeah, it's a tricky thing really. So Natural England last year updated a research report on habitats and carbon sequestration and storage. I think you'd probably just Google Natural England carbon storage, you'll come up with it. And so they reviewed hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed academic papers and studies to try and sort of consolidate down data and information about what different habitats could provide, whether that was different types of grassland, from improved agricultural grassland to sort of calcareous semi-natural grassland to woodlands to wetlands, running water, various different things. And they looked at the sort of typical figures for vegetation type in terms of kilograms or tons of carbon sequestered per year. And they also looked at soil associated with those different habitats to see how much then would be stored in the soil from that vegetation. And so that's one way of looking at it, and we've used that in projects for the Environment Agency. They had a wetland project in Dorset, and they're looking to re-wet some meadows habitats that were drying out, and they wanted to deliver more carbon sequestration and storage from that, as well as biodiversity net gain. So we use that sort of research output, to sort of to look at it. So it's very qualitative. Otherwise, this is sort of getting away from our areas of specialism, but it's an area I'm trying to get into a little bit through some research work that I'm doing back at the University of Manchester, and so that's very much looking at sort of soil analysis and looking at sort of laboratory-based analysis of soil and carbon coming off the soil. It's also looking at sort of like the microbiological productivity of CO2, and it's also looking at what comes out in liquid, that you get water going through the soil, what's being stored, what's being washed out, and measuring emissions of gas coming off the soil directly using particular sensors, which is obviously not something that's very easy to access or get hold of that kit. I haven't got hold of it myself yet, so but yeah, sorry, I haven't looked at any of the chat messages, but yeah, that's really where we are with this project, and lessons we're learning here we can apply to the ongoing work we're doing with Corsham and elsewhere.
Okay, Adrian, did you want to ask anything more on it?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, it was just really the methods and the cost of actually taking a soil sample either in the middle of the field or in an ancient wetland or in a hedge to get some idea of the percentage by volume of carbon in the soil that surround our local fields. How's that done, and how much does it cost, and how long does it take? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I won't have everything at my fingertips, I'm afraid, to answer that question. But in terms of just a rough sort of thoughts, I think in terms of taking a soil sample, I mean, you can take that with an auger, or just with a hand trowel, keeping it sort of low tech, depending on the depth you want to get that soil from. So not very long to take that sort of sample. And then in terms of sort of laboratory analysis, you're probably excuse me, should put that on silent. Probably a few £100, maybe less, but I'm guessing, really. I'm afraid you'd have to sort of contact a lab to get that sort of cost more accurately.
Okay. We were at a farm this year. Can't remember the name of the farm now. Help me, Claire. Where the farmer there was
Yatesbury, Bill.
Yeah, Yatesbury
farm.
Yeah, and he was, I think, Reading University, doing either a PhD or something as well, trying to work out how he measured the level of carbon stored, and he was saying that he, once he'd gone organic and regenerative, etc., he actually stored more carbon in the soil, and he could demonstrate that through testing. But he wasn't sure when the limit, because there's a limit. You can only put so much stuff in a bottle, and you can only put so much soil carbon in the ground. And what happens when that happens? And is it then being, as you say, washed away and through the soil with the water? Or what? And he was doing some research on that. I don't know where your with University of Manchester is going, but it sounds a similar sort of field. But Yeah, we're all saying, well, we should do no planting for palms, etc. But that gives you 5-10 years of increased storage. What happens after that? What do you do then?
Yeah, well, you're right. There is. I mean, it's early days for me on my PhD, but that seems to be the case, that there is a limit, you know, that would depend on soil type, soil depth as well, and level of disturbance. You know, so a field that's sort of ploughed regularly, you know, you're always going to be losing carbon through oxygenation, that sort of thing, degassing. One thing that I'm starting to look at a little bit is something called biochar. So it's sort of like a very sort of stable carbon that's formed through very high temperature pyrolysis of organic material of a particular high standard, and no presence of oxygen in there. So you end up sort of losing the sort of water and oxygen off it, but storing all the carbon. And so it's a very, very sort of dense form of charcoal, effectively, with a massive surface area. And starting to do a few sort of experiments looking at putting that into soil and looking at its stability. So comparing that with a control plot in a few different locations. And then some of those methods that I mentioned will be things that I'll be doing hopefully, you know, next spring when the soil warms up a little bit more, looking at the stability of it. But it seems that seems like a really useful sort of product that you can, you know, from rather than all woody debris being sort of left to sort of decompose as habitat, or being used as sort of biomass pellets, and using it to sort of form biochar, as long as you can power that with renewable energy, obviously. Then taking it and using something like a no dig technique, or no, you know, that sort of thing, to get it under the soil surface, and, you know, continue to sort of apply it over time to sort of build up you know, a layer of it in the ground. So if that's feasible in grassland, for example, it's typically not disturbed, that could be something that's really useful when you scale it up. But it's yeah, it's early days, very early days for what I'm looking at the moment. Only just sort of put some of the biochar in the ground, so I've got to wait till next spring to do some experiments on it.
Okay, interesting.
Learn more about it as well.
Yeah. Sounds a very expensive way of creating carbon.
Well, but it has
high tech.
if you have access to you know, good renewable energy source that you may generate on your own, it does have a byproduct of heat, so that heat can then be used, you know, in terms of, you know, building or feed into district level heating.
Sure.
So, you know, it's a very sort of carbon rich sort of thing. It's like times sort of 3, you know, by weight compared to your sort of source of material. So it's quite sort of efficient in that way. So it's about making the most of the whole process. You know,
Yeah.
Just, you know, use it on its own.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on that? Yeah, Julian.
Thanks. Yeah, well, just quickly on the priorities point. Yeah, there's someone in Devon that I know that's sort of doing some stuff with that, and they've just got a big sort of burner. They call it their dragon. I mean, it's fueled by, you know, burning bits of wood, but they use it for burning lots of the offcuts and brackish from, you know, cutting hedges and things. And it is a big problem knowing what best to do with your waste wood, isn't it?
Yeah.
The question I was really going to ask though was, I just wondered if you had any good comments on model tree strategies, particularly for urban areas, that we can copy and just sort of give to our parish council or town council or unitary authority, and say, you know, we really need to doing that. I mean, Bristol's got some good ones. I wonder if any are being developed for Wiltshire, or any you'd recommend that we can just sort of take off the shelf more or less and say, this is how you do it.
Yeah, I don't have any other examples off the top of my head, I'm afraid, apart from the one I'm working on. So I would probably say that's quite a good approach to doing it, because it's quite you could make it a much lighter weight version with data that's quite, you know, readily accessible if you've got access to some sort of mapping system. But even if not, then there's a website, magic.gov.uk, which allows you to sort of create sort of layers, mapped layers showing different sort of different features and things, and draw your own features on them. And I guess no one size fits all, because it's all down to local communities. And you know, this is really where the local nature recovery strategy comes in. It's about making sure it fits for the people who are able to get behind these types of strategies, and you know, it fitting your local requirements. So so I think that's important when you're taking this forward.
Yeah, so the sort of thing I'm thinking of, and the thing that they do in Bristol is when a development happens, for example, if the developer has to cut down trees and they have to replace them with a number of others, depending on the size of the trees and things like that. And they've got a sort of like a price list thing for street trees, so that, you know, if you can sponsor a tree, you know, it facilitates a, you know, group of residents who want a tree to be able to sort of just sponsor it and, you know, do that. And there's a thing called Bristol Tree Forum, which is, I think, got some lots of good stuff in it. But you know, taking that and adapting it as something you can present to a council is what I was sort of hoping for. But yeah, thanks. So it's obviously a bit of a detailed issue. I'll talk about it later. Thanks.
Thanks, Julian. Claire.
Yeah, thanks for the talk, Matt. It's very interesting, and I'm a Salisbury person, and I'm concerned as to whether everything that's being done by the council is actually rather being offset by the intensification of everybody's gardens. Do you have any feeling about that? Because I look around me to areas where there were gardens with small trees. I see the council planting big trees, and I see enormous numbers of sheds, and it's sort of going back to the runoff conversation earlier. Has anybody got any sense? Is there anybody in the council who's got a sense about this intensification of the use of people's gardens and the extent to which that's reducing green cover? Because there's a big emphasis on big trees, but not on small shrubs and minor trees.
It's a really interesting point, but it's not something that you know, I've spoken to anybody about. The person who would know more, the point of contact, is somebody called Mark Reed, who's the environment manager. He's very, very approachable, very nice. But yeah, I think, you know, people always, you know, have different views. There's trends, isn't there, in terms of what people do with their land, and pressure of you know, maybe you know, having more people in one house and more space required, and all of those sorts of things. So I don't know the answer to your question, but it is important, because I think, you know, we need gardens. Gardens are really diverse and provide that really strong linkages behind houses or around houses. You know, gardens back onto each other and create these other sort of habitat patches for, you know, birds and invertebrates, bats, all sorts of things. And if you lose those, you can suddenly have you end up with these much larger gaps. So it's not so much stepping stones for nature. You've got too much gap between the stepping stones. And you know, things aren't, like hedgehogs aren't able to sort of move around or help in terms of recovery. And when it comes to runoff, the more impermeable surface you get, then obviously the more runoff you have, where more vegetated sort of borders and things like that, or lawns and fronts of, you know, drives, you know, you're helping, you know, attenuate that water. So another really important but really, you know, subtle change that's going on, because if one person changes a garden in a street one year and a couple the next year, nobody really notices and joins up until it gets to the point where it really is visible. So interesting to look at aerial imagery over time to see if you can pick a change in that, maybe like the infrared image that I had, you know. Depending on
certainly where I am on Paws Dean, because we have these open frontages which are then all being paved over, and in terms of the heat in the summer, it's very startling, the increase in heat, as we're losing our grass our grass fronts,
Mm.
and they're all been put to paving. Mm.
And you know, there's a lot of information, wasn't there, being broadcast this summer just gone on the difference of temperature between being out away from trees and being under trees, and massive difference. And that's just going to be so vital. But you can't grow a tree quickly overnight. You've got to have, you know, you've got to protect the trees you've got, and you need to be planting trees, if that's the purpose, in good time, so that they're mature, and they need to be species that can adapt as well to changes in temperature.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you was is there a sort of thought together plan for the city centre to mean that if you have a heat wave, you can actually walk around the city centre? Because certainly I would not this summer have walked across the Market Square.
That's really good.
I wouldn't have made it across. I'd have.
I want to note that down.
I mean, I was thinking of. I mean, even if you have massive things in pots at a wheel or something, to get across that Market Square for an elderly person, I think you need a halfway house to get across it.
Yeah. That's really a really interesting observation. I'm not saying the other comments aren't, but just that's not something that, you know, penny dropped in my head just when you said that.
A couple of points made on the drives, by the way, Claire, in the chat about the should have regs for putting them in if they're paving over things. And I think for a long time that's been the case, that actually people aren't allowed to just pave over their front gardens or their rear gardens. Because of runoff. I thought that was not permitted, but there you go. If it's got to be permeable, then it's fine. I suppose you could put in grasscrete or something to allow the water to run through. But
I don't know whether it's policed though, is it? I mean, who's policing?
Probably not.
Nobody.
Because most things aren't.
Most things aren't. I mean, we've just had a planning issue here, and you don't even have to put up a notice when you're building a house if it's not a major development. So let alone a bit of do-it-yourself paving or a bit of concrete or something. It's just not policed. I mean, no regulations are effective if they're not policed, aren't they?
Yeah, I'll talk about it. Okay, so Matt, your final subject was your interaction with the green and blue infrastructure and how that's gone with the council.
So again, we were invited to tender for some work at the beginning of 2022 with Wiltshire Council and Natural England, and it was looking at a pilot study on the local nature recovery strategy. Back then, the anticipation was that the local nature recovery strategy would be sort of kicked off formally this summer, but obviously with the turbulence in politics, that's been pushed back. Leading up to this, Wiltshire Council had put together a number of very important strategic sort of documents, so the green and blue infrastructure strategy, and the other project that I talked about, the community environment toolkit, sort of fed into that, and various other documents. So the idea was to pilot, and this was a sort of national pilot, how it might be possible to engage local communities and understand the projects they're doing and their interests, and put together a sort of repeatable method and structure to sort of tease out information that could then feed into the county level nature recovery strategy, so that there were almost off-the-shelf projects that have been costed up. So when DEFRA comes forward and says, here's some money to spend, then because there's a short turnaround time usually when that money becomes available, then these projects could be picked up and funds could be released. So that's the sort of general sort of premise, sort of testing the process out. 4 communities were picked for the pilot by Natural England. That was Carn and Devizes and Bradford Avon and Trowbridge. So we started off an initial round of sort of engagement to sort of set the context, and then we had a second round by drawing 2 adjacent sort of communities together, so that you could look at synergies between them. So it was a really brilliant opportunity to find out about what local communities are doing, and I think one of the key sort of bits of feedback really was that for local nature recovery strategies to be successful, there's only so much that the sort of like the main partners, as it were, Natural England, local authorities, wildlife trusts, big organisations like MOD, water companies, can do in terms of land they have. Everywhere else, it relies on communities to sort of get together and take forward their projects. So one of the first things was to sort of hear from the communities about the sort of things they were doing, and where, and how they went about it, and how the sort of funding sort of came about, or whether it all sort of volunteering, goodwill, that sort of thing. We then sort of looked at this stuff coming from central and regional government, and how that could be supportive to sort of community-based projects. But the key things that bullet point in there is local action delivery that makes the most difference. So we sort of got together, and as a group, we produced some initial plans. So this is Devizes Parish, and we had some little sort of 3D sort of snakes and little post-its and things, and people would sort of mark up where they felt key corridors were for wildlife, for water, for people to sort of move about. We've sort of mapped up some of the green infrastructure that Natural England has identified. So another part of this was the sort of ground truth Natural England's green infrastructure mapping, so which is very sort of more high level. Obviously the local communities know their patch better, so sort of ground truthing those, and to identify where projects were and the things that made things possible. So there's some good group work done for each community on their own, and so you can sort of see some of the sort of connections sort of here. Here's one from Trowbridge here. So we were sort of thinking about how you could connect up corridors. Gardens came up as a big thing, as a way of sort of providing linear connectivity through streets. Devizes, I think, found it, the limited opportunity for creating planting in the town centre, because so much paved surface. So we're thinking about opportunities for planters and those sorts of things to sort of try and introduce more green infrastructure that way. And then, yeah, you can sort of see from here how we're sort of marking the plans up and getting people to do that. And we also then put these plans online so people had a bit more time, or if they couldn't attend the workshops, to sort of feed into it and add more sort of commentary. So we then sort of link the communities together when we start off with this sort of joined up map here with a whole range of categories sort of mapped up. And then the groups got back together again and checked what was on there, and then added more sort of connectivity to try and sort of link things together. We were also talking about the toolkit that had been put together about how communities could sort of develop what they were doing, and link into the neighbourhood plans if neighbourhood planning was happening as well. So the sort of output from this, was generating sort of knowledge of what was happening where, and how that could be, fed into the neighbourhood planning work. So that led to a sort of like a pilot report, and I think we were able to show the process worked in terms of there's quite a lot of information, again, a bit like the Salisbury Tree strategy you can pull off for free, and you can layer it up as a sequence of maps, and you can print that out at a large scale. But then you really do need people to interact and get involved and have a look at it, because you need that local knowledge as much as you need the local projects to take things forward. But it definitely highlighted that a lot of things were already happening. You can sort of get them mapped out and marked up and see where the gaps are, and use that to sort of target other opportunities. But you need to have these projects that are happening from the communities to make things much more successful, because they fill in the gaps from the triple SI management, for example, or agricultural land use change, that sort of thing. So it makes a real difference in terms of moving things forward. As I've not had any more involvement in the local nature recovery strategy since this project finished, and from what I can tell, you know, it's all on hold until government makes a decision on where things are going. But in the meantime, you know, the community groups that are, you know, driving things forward at the local level are still, you know, doing what they're able to do. It was, you know, really great to hear from them all. Just amazing what's going on, really. And what I liked about this was it recognized, this process recognized that that's the heart of it, and drawing it together, and that then allows the funding to be unlocked, if that's ever made available, to deliver, you know, more of the projects and provide more resources and support, you know, to the community groups, alongside things like management of parks and allotments that maybe local town parish councils already have and manage.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Questions? Big thing. Okay, well, I'll ask one as usual. So what you're saying about these areas are that you need activity at the very local level to create that sort of the fertilization of thought, if you like, as to how the corridors and the recovery strategy can grow from a point. You can't just expect it to happen. You've got to have actually people, and what I'm saying is you have to have people doing it already, so that they become just a light bulb up on the screen or on the map or whatever, saying these people are doing some stuff. How do we then make it bigger?
Yeah, I think that's right. Although, you know, obviously you could start from scratch, but I think by having those existing projects really catalyzes others to sort of see what's going on and it's already happening.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be put into a special category. I think, you know, there's so many different initiatives that are happening, you know, from your own garden scale, you know, up to, you know, larger projects, nature reserve type projects, and beyond. But I think you need that sort of community engagement to reveal what's going on, and, you know, to get people to get a shared sense of what's going on and then get sparked by it. But I think also it's around, because part of this is around, you know, connectivity for nature and for people, you know, using anything but cars. So it's really sort of thinking about where people, like desire lines almost, you know, and obviously a lot of that is going to be on privately owned land. So that then highlights that issue, which is obviously very significant, and that then might highlight contacts and who knows that landowner, and they may even be in the room, or, you know, a separate event maybe for farmers and landowners. So it really starts to sort of engage, you know, people coming together, you know, to try and sketch this out and achieve it. So getting it down on paper and having that visualization really sort of helps see what's desired and what's easily deliverable. And then, you know, you've got the bit in the middle, which is the hardest bit, which is, you know, where you don't necessarily have access to land at that point.
yeah. So when you're working in one of those test areas, say devices, did you find 6-7 groups there who were all doing these things and knew about each other, or did you then find these groups and then join them together as part of the process?
They were invited really through Wiltshire Council's contacts within their sort of team. So, you know, we had, I mean, to start with, we had organisations like Bradford and Avon Town Council, Trowbridge Town Council, and then groups that were working within Friendly Bradford, for example, other groups, Wiltshire Wildlife Trust, Trowbridge Environment Partnership, you know, who were mostly aware of each other, I think. We didn't have huge numbers of people attending the sort of workshop events, but, you know, again, part of the problem with some of these projects is timing. You know, they always seem to be timed at a certain time of the year when there's a bit of budget left over, and everything's got to be done within a sort of 6-week window for the funding to be released. So it doesn't really give a lot of time to give the warning to that. The Salisbury one's an exception, I think, you know, the amount of time we've had for it. So that will bias, you know, what you find out. But notwithstanding that, I think it was a really good demonstration of an approach and how you can get groups together and they can feed off each other. So with more time, and I mean that was one of our recommendations really, is more time to make groups aware, get more groups involved, more of these consultation events. But that's very time consuming, and then that relates to some like myself, if it's a business being involved, then we charge a fee. It's part of our work. But
yeah.
But then, but there's other ways of doing it. I mean, that's it's about getting the information, and if other organisations are able to sort of maybe had a briefing for everybody who led different groups, and then the groups could go off by themselves. That might be a way to sort of make things more cost effective.
Yeah. Okay. Lots to think about there. I mean, we've talked about this before several times, about how you get that spark, a catalyst or whatever in a local area to actually start growing these things. And it is really, really difficult because, as you say, there are very few people actually in truth who would engage with this, even if you want them to. Anyway, Julian, and then Hazel.
Nice. A sort of quickie general question. I think a big problem is pesticide use, particularly on farms and livestock runoff and so forth throughout the county. And I'm just wondering how that's sort of regulated and who you can talk to about it if there's a particular problem. I know it's supposed to be Environment Agency. I know they're completely under-resourced to do anything about it. And what in practice can be done that, in your experience?
Yeah, I think the Environment Agency is the first port of call in terms of any sort of pollution. So whether that's sort of runoff with sediments or other stuff coming into it. And there is a national pollution hotline, but there are local offices as well. So which you could try and approach. I think it's probably worth, somebody mentioned earlier, talking to town and parish councils as well if there's a particular problem, and just sort of explore that, because they may well have contacts and then know a way to sort of approach that landowner. Yeah, I think those are the two sort of main things. If it's a site, if it's affecting a triple SI, say like the River Avon in Salisbury, that Hampshire catchment, then Natural England would be interested in terms of the pollution side of things, and they can bring enforcement around on that as well.
Sorry, thanks. And also in urban settings, I mean, are there any recommended or best case pesticide strategies and things like that you'd recommend that town and parish councils adopt?
So you say pesticides?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, obviously, least amount possible, and looking at why you're trying to resolve that problem. Is it something on a particular plant species that is a continuous problem, and you're better off replacing those plants with something else, so it's not like a high maintenance sort of planting area perhaps. And obviously as time passes, more and more pesticides get more and more heavily regulated or removed from being in supply. But I think it's difficult times with my burglar alarm's gone off in my building. That's the alarm company. Do you just mind? I'm going to mute it and just tell him everything's okay.
I think while he's on the phone, I think we've had more than enough of it. Well, I'm not strong way to say it. Sorry, not more than enough. We've taken up a lot of his time, and I'm very appreciative of that. But I think we've got to close out what Matt has been doing, which is really, it's really good. But and we could go on all night. I think there's lots of questions. I think looking at what our agenda was, I think we'll move on after Matt's come back off his phone on to only two things really. I think we just want to briefly tell people what we're doing in December and January, so ahead, and we will try and get our notes out a bit earlier than we did this time again. And the other thing is, perhaps you could consider or think about we want to have a conversation in December about food, which is obviously forefront of everyone's mind just at Christmas, and just see what your Christmas dinner plate might look like and why. But it's going to be a very short and hopefully fairly festive meeting. Matt, thank you. I mean,
sorry about that.
Whilst
the alarm sets itself, and I've obviously triggered it somehow, and they thought I looked a bit dubious.
I think we have had an incredible time with talking to you. I think we can do that again, and we can spend a lot of time taking up your valuable time. So I think thank you for tonight. It's been very, very educational.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for asking me to meet you and speak with you. It's great, and you know, clearly you're one of the groups doing great things around the county. You know, and you know all the links you've got and everything like that, which is fabulous, really. So, you know, keep up everything you're doing as well.
Well, we're trying. Let's put it that way. I know it's always nice to know other people are trying as well. Okay, thanks, Matt. We're going to go on and move on to something else. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
If you wish, but if you don't want to, that's
no, I've got to prepare for tomorrow's exhibition in Salisbury now, so make sure I've got everything on my checklist.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Matt. Brilliant.
Bye.
Yeah, cheers.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, so December we're going to talk about Christmas dinner, and then I think we'd just be interested to know how you're dealing with your Christmas dinner and what the carbon impact of it might be. And so that's a very short, very small meeting perhaps, but we're going to do it. And then in January, have we got Claire?
Bill,
yes.
Sorry, just to interrupt on the Christmas dinner. I did just thinking about it earlier today. I in terms of the Christmas dinner, I think what is interesting is the Christmas dinner and how much it differs from what we're doing normally. That's owing to the presence of our friends' relations. I think that's an interesting thing. The extent to which we can carry on with what we might want to do ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah, we might even get a nice little, someone to give us a little light-hearted talk about it as well. There's someone in mind, Eva Rowe, who's done stuff with us before, so we'll see if we can get him.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds like a really good idea. We'll have a drink in the meantime and have a very merry evening on the screen. Okay. So Claire, January, what we doing on January?
January, sorry, mute. We've got Oliver Howells. He's confirmed. If you remember, in September, the Queen's funeral got into a bit of a mashup, and Oliver Howells is the senior ecologist for the MOD, who is going to give us a talk relative to what the MOD are doing and their conservation activation, etc.
Okay, that'd be brilliant. I mean,
I think everybody's had the information's up on the website, so it's everybody's sort of had that prior to September, but he has confirmed for January. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be good. Okay, MOD in January. All right. I think really that's it. I think we've done that. I can say we could have talked to Matt all night, but I get the feeling that he's in the same boat as we are almost. That he's trying to find people to get things done with, and it's really, really difficult. And the one thing that's come out of it for me is how we deal with this mishmash of well, not we, but the country deals with this mishmash of who does what on managing our future in terms of the impact of the climate change on us. It's really, really tricky. And you know, Gordon was talking about writing to our MPs. Well, we do that every week, and it doesn't seem to make a lot of difference. So yeah, it's food for thought, really, food for thought. But I'm not sure what we as a group can do about it. But
one thing I think is worth doing, and if people do write to their MPs every week, is to write and protest about the automatic repeal of the EU laws, because there is no way that environmental protection law is going to be sorted out and rewritten. I put in the chat something about the draft National Action Plan. That hasn't been for pesticides, that hasn't been sorted out. So if we have this automatic repeal of EU legislation at the end of next year, there is no way this government is going to be able to consult, prepare plans, consult, pass new legislation for all these environmental things, which will automatically be rolled away. So I think if people are writing to MPs, it needs to be quite focused on that as a priority, which is what the Wildlife Trusts and so on have asked all their members to do, because it's a real threat. And there's no clarity on the environmental land management elms thing at all at the moment. It's obviously being battered backwards and forwards between the NFU, which wants food production to be given a big weight in terms of a public good. So the NFU and the current situation following the war in Ukraine means that public good may be, could end up 90% producing food is a public good and 10% nature recovery is a public good. So that's all, and nobody knows what's happening at the moment, least of all farmers. They just don't know what they're doing.
If they decided they were going to make all land agriculturally productive, we need to double, triple, quadruple the labour force in farms.
Well, I mean, it's just absolute chaos, because you've got the agriculture minister literally begging the Home Office to be allowed to have more immigration so that the food isn't going to rot in the fields. I mean, they literally are not able to speak with any sort of coherent voice. So farmers are begging for labour, and the Home Office is just,
We have 60,000 people living in hotels at the moment.
Yeah, it's just bonkers.
Who could actually just as well be living on a farm and doing the farmer's work with them.
But George Eustace, who until the end of Boris Johnson was our Environment Secretary, is just announced how and stood up and told everybody how rubbish the trade deal with New Zealand, Australia was, and how it sold the farmers down the river. Whereas back in the day, he was defending it, saying what a great plan. Yeah. So, I mean, there's no coherence whatsoever. So what's going to come out of this rapid review of elms, which seems not very rapid, nobody knows. So that's affecting all this global topic of land management, because everybody's been planning for years for elms, and now nobody knows what they're doing.
And the man who's was driving it, sort of created it, Michael Gove, who he needs to come back, and I can't believe I'm saying that, but he needs to come back.
I know, at least, yes, but
he was doing something.
Well, he certainly had a plan and a direction of travel, didn't he? You can see the issue about food production and needing more food security, but I mean, it's just so frustrating for everybody not to know, what to plant next year or something. It's
maybe
unbelievable.
Out to all our members. This 10 key things you should be writing to your MP about. Anyway, okay. I think, has anybody got anything else they want to say? Yeah, Gordon, are you going? I'll wave goodbye, or you want to say something?
I've sent you an email to the group, but the contact is not working.
Well, contact online.
But I've sent it as an email then to the group as well, separately, and it's this item closes on the 27th, but it's a survey being done on behalf of NERC, and we can get some money out of it, or they want to ask people to help doing all this, and it's all to do with the environment. It's community groups and liking to take part in meaningful conversation on environmental issues, and it closes on the 27th of November. So it's there, it's been sent to you on the contact.
Get it circulated. Okay.
Okay,
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah. Anybody else? Are we done? Okay. See you in December for Christmas dinner. If not before the members' meeting, I hope.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Bill.
mate.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
He was going to leave.